Alright, the Zenar 50mm f1.9. Now something odd here, you'll notice that this lens hood there is quite rattly. It means that the retainer is probably already loose. Normally you can get that off with a friction tool. See if it's going to come loose for us. Yeah, unwind that with the tip of a toothpick. That is the lens hood off there. Let's take this off the camera body. Put the body to one side. Look at the lens. Looks clean. Focus is stiff. Oh yeah, very stiff. It is like a definite bump as that comes up against the end of the travel. 3 screws and washers around the perimeter. Hold the focus, hold the lens capsule into the lens body. These are also where you would make your adjustment to the focus of the lens. Tip those out. The lens capsule will come out. Here we have the thread, helical thread, and this is all very sticky. Diaphragm moves nicely, no problem there. Lens looks clean. Pop that to one side. Look at the body. It's quite dirty. Bit of grit and dust in there, and the grease, there's grease everywhere it shouldn't be, and probably not enough where it should be. And start taking this to pieces. 4 screws at the back. One of them's painted red. There's another alignment mark there. Where one of a group of screws is painted red as an alignment mark. It's a handy thing to know, because if you manage to scar up one of the screw heads through clumsy work with your screwdriver, or somebody else has, you can strip the paint off that, use that as a good screw, and the ugly screw put there where the painted one was, and by the time you've painted the top of it, no one will know it was ever rough. Alright, so here's the focus mount. This is it fixed to the camera body, and this brass ring here is the rangefinder coupling if you were using this lens on a Retina 3S camera. This is a bit sticky. There are 3 little screws here and 3 retainers. Remove those. Drop that out. These components will need to be cleaned. They're quite dirty, and all traces of that old grease needs to come off. And here are the works for the aperture setting. So these components, I usually lay them out in the order I take them off the camera, so that they go back in the correct order. And this pointer for the depth of field, that has the fine spring on it, not the coarse spring. There's the separator that separates between the depth of field pointer mechanisms. We can unhook with that spring, that's the coarse spring. Here's the other depth of field pointer. This is quite sticky. Then we've got this piece. This has got the little cam follower that runs here, and there's a lot of dust and rubbish under here. I'll see if these springs will lift off without a fight. Well, the larger of the two will. And the reason I want to lift those springs off is because it avoids damaging them accidentally while I'm cleaning the rest of this. And it may or may not be possible to get this one off, since the small ones are clip on there better and are more fragile, so they're more easily damaged. No, it's not going to come. I'm not fighting with that. I'm likely to do more damage. There are two brass plates here. Now they clamp this mechanism together. They're wedge shaped at the edges, so you get some adjustment for how firmly it holds the two pieces together. And they've been lubricated with probably graphite grease, and that grease has gone all sticky. This piece of plastic in here is something, it's Teflon or something Teflon-like, a low friction material. You've got to be careful, it's easily stretched, it's quite thin. It's easily stretched. If it's stretched, of course, it won't want to go back where it came from. Now that's black with grease. I want all of that off there. It shouldn't have any of that crap on there at all. So these components now I need to clean. You can see how much all that black on there is grease, and all this filth in here is dust and old oil and grease. And all of these components need to be nice and sparkly. Now this camera came to me with two standard lenses, so I have no idea which was the original standard lens that came with the body and which one has come from some other camera. Certainly if you had an f1.9 lens, you're probably not going to go out of your way to hunt out an f2.8 lens, but you might the other way around. And I've got that spring off now. Should have done that earlier. See if I can get these components clean. Yeah, this is really pretty grimy. I could take the name ring off here and put this in the ultrasonic cleaner, but much rather not. all that grit that had got in here, along with the grease, would acted like a grinding paste in here, and grind away at that metal. Right, that piece looks pretty good. Sometimes you've got to have a couple of goes at this. Sometimes you end up with a residual bit of grit that only surfaces on final assembly, and you have to pull it back down again and deal to it. If the depth of field pointers are unusually stiff in their movement, you may find that changing the aperture on your camera is an unusually stiff action. It won't affect the action of the shutter apart from that though. If the diaphragm's unusually stiff, because perhaps if the blades were oily or something, then that would load up the shutter cocking action, and that could cause problems with the camera, up to and including failure of the shutter cocking rack or the transfer shaft cam, or indeed the gears at either end. So it's important that the lenses work correctly, otherwise you could cause an otherwise good camera to fail. That's why I always want the standard lens with the camera body when I'm servicing one of these cameras. When you have a thick layer of grease like this between broad surfaces, it can act as a drag on things. Like a helical with too much or too thick grease in it. It stops things from moving as freely as they should. Yeah, this piece of plastic's not in a particularly pretty shape. I think it's being dragged backwards and forwards. By the focus scale ring part. And that grease, there's like little microscopic bits of grit embedded in the plastic that almost certainly brought in and, or held in place by that grease. I'm still left with marks on that plastic. I don't think I can see the back of those easily. Let's have another go. There's another piece of paper to work on. Here I'm just using some naphtha. I don't know what other solvent would be useful. Yeah, the plastic's actually cut at that point. Or certainly very much stretched and folded over. Yeah, somebody certainly didn't do this a good turn by what I've done here. Help if I'm putting this on the right side. Okay. Yeah, that plastic wants to bunch up. It's pulled out of shape. That's why it's got that pleat in it there. It's been stretched. I'm going to have to cut a piece out of it. Yeah, it's at this point. I'll cut that. We'll see what it looks like. Yeah, there's a definite, it's been stretched and there's definitely like an overlap there. Okay. That's something to sit this on while I'm working on it, really. Remove that piece there because that's really doing nothing, and flapping around it's likely to cause problems. I may have to cut more of that away in order to get it to lie down flat. It's just been stretched out of shape. I'm going to have to trim a tiny bit from the outside circumference of that so that it'll lay in to that groove, otherwise it puckers up. Oh, it's hard to cut too. Keep slipping away from the scissors. Yeah, I don't like that. I have to trim that back with a scalpel while I hold it down, I think. No, I'm not cutting it on that mat. Well, with a bit of judicious trimming, I've got that so that it sits down relatively flat. See if I can get this all in place. Okay, that's sitting in there. Excuse me. Right, well, after all the interruptions, I'm back to this. Now, these pieces here originally had a very low friction surface on them. It must have been some coating, probably not dissimilar to Teflon, I would imagine. But it's worn through. So I've cleaned all the rubbish away, all the old grease and filth and dust, and we'll put these components back on. And try and get them adjusted so that there's no undue slop in the system, but the focus ring turns smoothly. Previously it had quite a drag to it, and that drag would have been in the main the excessive amounts of sticky grease that was holding everything back. That large flat Teflon washer arrangement was certainly stretched, and it was puckered up at one point, which meant that it probably meant that the focus mount probably couldn't move smoothly because it was going to be tight in one position. Now that rotates nice and smoothly, that's very good. But I don't know if I've got too much play. I've got too much play if I hold it across the brackets like that. I can see I've got too much play. So I've got to loosen those screws and move those pieces out, which will pull the wedge in tighter. I don't want to overdo it, otherwise it'll make it stiff. Well, that's taken the movement out in that direction, and in this direction there's a little bit of rattle, so I'll just shift it. I'll just tighten those up first, see if that makes a difference, because if they're loose you'll also get some rattle. There's certainly play across in that direction. Let's try adjusting that. Which direction was it? That one? Yeah. A bit in that direction. It feels pretty good. I think I can tighten it up a bit more than that. That's good. Now I move on to the next stage.